Hi, and welcome to session 2 of the Ed Collab gathering. I just want to remind you to feel free to tweet out during the session today to let others join you in conversation with what you are learning. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All righty. So our session today is on cultivating a culture of reading by curating a collection. And my name is Cindy Gerwin. And just a little bit about myself. I'm a bibliophile. For those of you who don't know what that means, it means I am a lover of all things books. I'm also a 5th grade classroom teacher, past president and conference chair of the Illinois Reading Council. I have my doctorate of education and literacy, and I'm an associate member of the Educator Collaborative. And our topics for discussion today, we're going to start with learning a little bit about reader identity and agency and how that's connected to curating an inclusive collection. We're going to talk a little bit about multimodal text and using those to build community. And we're going to end with this idea of finding some balance. And I think it's really important to sort of frame our conversation today with an overarching goal for reading instruction. So 2 important concepts that really sort of pop out at me when I think of my overarching goal for reading instruction are, first of all, fostering independence, constantly asking myself, how am I helping kids become independent instead of dependent on me? And empowering children, which leads to a sense of self-efficacy and agency. And agency really is about children being able to advocate for themselves and their own needs. So let's start off with a little bit about reader identity and agency. As educators, I think we're all familiar with the demanding work that it takes to match kids with a just right text, because we really do understand that that can mean the difference between creating lifelong readers, creating readers who are illiterate readers, which means they can read but they don't want to read, or noticing that kids are just shutting down out of frustration. And so I'm going to pause here for just a moment. As you look at these different classroom libraries, I want you to think for a second, like, which library would you want to be a part of? And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. And I want to tell you a little bit about my story and how I came to this presentation. So I am a job shifter, and I became a teacher about 15 years ago. This is my 15th year. And when I was working on my master's with certification or with licensure, I started collecting books because I knew right away that one of the things that would be really important was having a classroom library. And so when I started my first year teaching, I was really lucky. I had sort of already started collecting, or had a pretty good start on collecting books. And when I moved into the classroom, I noticed that the school was still sort of using Basil series. Not all the teachers were. They were kind of being phased out a little bit. And so my reading instruction didn't really incorporate much of the Basil series. It was really important to me and my philosophy of teaching to use trade books. And so I kind of combined work of Ellen Keene and Stephanie Harvey and teaching the different strategies for reading using different text sets. And one of the things that I did to help engage kids with reading was use the Illinois Choice Reading Awards, which at the time were the Caudle. So we read those books. Sometimes I read the books whole class. Sometimes kids read them in book clubs. We voted for the books. And so those first couple of years, I felt really good that I was at least creating a joyful literacy community. And then about 3 or 4 years into my career, my district adopted I'm going to say a reading program, but I really hesitate to say that because it wasn't an instructional program. It wasn't a curriculum. It was a program in the sense that all of the classroom got classroom libraries, which that part was awesome, right? They were leveled bins, and every one of the books and every piece of material that we got as part of this program was clearly leveled. It was clearly labeled for everybody to see. Kids started keeping reading logs, counting their minutes. We posted minutes, and we also gave out rewards. So obviously the good thing was every classroom had a classroom library, and I didn't have to pay for it. That part was good. But the things that really worried me were the labeled bins that everybody could see, and then using rewards to try and motivate kids to read. So over the next couple years, what I really started to notice was the joy just sort of seemed to be getting sucked out of my classroom literacy community. And so when I started my doctoral work, that became what I really wanted to focus on. And I'm going to bring my screen back up again for you. So, oops, there we go. And what I realized was there is a really fine line between leveling books and leveling children. And so even with the best of intentions for myself or all the other teachers, what was happening in the classroom, what I believed was not just happening in my classroom, but in many classrooms, was that the programs and the materials are leveling practices were being emphasized over the kids, and that was what was just sort of sucking the joy out of the reading community. What I noticed was students were beginning to define themselves as readers based on their text level. And I know that there was a growing body of research that addressed the cognitive implications that leveling practice posed on a reader's academic achievement, but there really wasn't very many research studies that examined the complete reader, specifically the affective domain. So their identity, their agency, their motivation, interest, all those other things. And that's what I wanted to focus on. So there were 2 fifth grade classrooms that participated in my study. Both classrooms, all the kids in the classroom took a reading interest survey 3 times, beginning, middle, and end of the year. And they also took a motivation for reading questionnaire, which helped me really start to understand, was their motivation intrinsic or extrinsic? And then within those 2 classrooms, I also had 9 case study subjects that I interviewed 6 times throughout the year. I observed them, collected artifacts. That process was much more intensive. There were 2 main differences between the 2 classrooms. So both classrooms had a balanced literacy philosophy. The teachers were really strong in that. They had a lot of choice. One classroom had an extensive library that was not leveled and labeled, prominently labeled, and did not share reading levels with the kids, which is what Faunus and Pinnell advocate, that we don't tell kids their reading level because it's a teacher tool. The other classroom had an extensive library as well, but the books were leveled and labeled, and they did share reading ability with the kids. And 2 themes sort of emerged from this study. So the first was also in another study that I used very heavily by Contivori, that leveling systems were a systematic way to assert power over knowledge by limiting choices, by limiting kids' choices to a specific level. This continued to marginalize kids and inhibit their identity and efficacy. And it was definitely something that I noticed. Students in the classrooms with the library that the books were labeled and leveled, where they were told their reading level, had significantly more value-laden language. And what do I mean by that? I mean that when I asked them who they were as readers, the only way they had of describing themselves, or the most prominent way, was based on their reading level. When I asked what that meant, they said it was either good or bad, so they placed themselves somewhere on that hierarchical level. And for the kids who were struggling readers, who thought they were bad readers, several of them during the interviews had began to internalize that. So they started to feel that they themselves as a person were good or bad, not just that their reading habits were good or bad. And so I wanted to try to figure out how to move from this hierarchical structure that had formed with this, with how we were using our leveling practices, to bringing it back to a circle where everybody felt part of a shared community and felt more empowered. Second big theme that came across: when a student's ability to pass an informal reading inventory to move up to a level became the instructional focus, the attitude or the belief that reading was done for didactic or mundane purposes became really internalized. Alfie Kahn talks about this too, that when we have rewards, such as moving up reading levels or even some of the other tangible rewards, that really only motivates the people extrinsically to receive the reward, and they lose that intrinsic motivation. So we're like slowly diminishing that motivation that came from within. Faunus and Pinnell, who also advocate that you don't tell kids reading levels, that it's a teacher's tool, reinforce this concept when they stated that the purpose for reading cannot be about reading alone. All of those things make kids dependent on the teacher's judgment, which is not the same thing as fostering independence. And it just doesn't equate. Like, kids just didn't see reading as something that was pleasurable anymore. So I interviewed some kids, and I thought it'd be really helpful for you to not just hear from me, but to hear from some kids in my school. So these are 3 fifth graders and 3 fourth graders who want to share with you just a little bit about their reading identities. All right, so today we are in conversation with some 4th graders and 5th graders about reading identity. Okay, and then we're going to go around. If you guys could just introduce yourself really quick. So you want to go first?
Jaden.
And what grade?
5th grade.
Okay.
Nadia, 5th grade. I'm at 5th grade and Dr. Gerwin. Allie, 4th grade. I'm Gabe, 4th grade. I'm Angie, 4th grade.
Thank you. Okay, remember to talk nice and loud, you guys. Okay, so here's my first question. How would you describe yourself as a reader? When you think of who you are as a reader, how would you describe yourself? What words would you use?
I stick to one topic most of the time.
Okay, so you said topic. Does that mean you like nonfiction a lot?
I usually just read fiction books, or scary books.
Or scary books, but you stick to the story until the end is what I'm hearing you say. Okay. Anybody else? How would you describe yourself as a reader?
I don't really like reading paper books. I mostly like reading the books that read to me because I feel like I struggle with that and don't really know. I just like it more.
So the read to you, where it's highlighting the words and reading, it feels like it's a little bit easier. Do you feel like that's helping you get stronger as a reader too?
Yeah, because I whenever I would read a normal book, I would be like, this is too hard. I can't read it.
And the ebooks make you feel more successful. Okay, that's another, if you're not sure how to answer the question, who are you as a reader, can you tell me how reading makes you feel? What do you feel when you read? Do you feel happy, sad, struggling, frustrated? How do you feel when you read?
When I read, I feel like I'm in the book, because it's about the book, and then I feel I'm thinking all what's happening in my head and what's going to happen.
Do you see the book in your head? Do you feel like some people say they
Yeah,
see it, some books say, or some kids say they hear it?
Yeah, I imagine their voices, what they're going to be like, and how they look like, because a character in the book describes another character.
So it almost plays like a movie in your head. Okay. Any other thoughts?
I like to read historical fiction a lot, and the history books. I really feel happy when I'm like it'll play a movie in my head if I read for a long enough period of time.
Okay.
I like books about like sports and action stuff. Answer either. I usually stick with one book and I don't get rid of books that I don't think like I usually just finish it. I'm not really like I don't think it's a horrible book after I pick it up. Like I just feel like I don't really know the book, like understand it. So but I still read it until the end.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say it sounds like you do something like I do, which is really weird. Like I have this thing that I never abandon a book. I always finish it, and there's been very few books that I feel like I wish I had stopped because they weren't very good. And I feel like there's so many books, why not do one that's good? But it sounds like you're saying the same thing, like you have a hard time stopping. When you get partway through, do you find it gets better? Like, does that help pushing yourself a little bit more through with a lot of the books? Sometimes? Okay. I'm sorry.
So I start like reading a book and if I'm like halfway there and I don't like it, I have the same like I have to finish to see like
Just to see what happens.
yeah.
Yeah, I know I have that.
And because it like feels weird, like abandoned.
Yeah, I do the same thing. Okay, so I'm going to say these other two questions and you might want to talk about them together. So how do you choose the books that you read? Like, do you get recommendations? Do you just look at the cover? Like, how do you choose? And how do you know if that book is like a good fit for you, like a right choice for you?
I like take out book, like how I choose. I look at the cover and if it looks good, I read the back and see what it's about. And then I probably will like read a couple people like or something. How I kind of it is if it's a hard I might not bored of like in the inside of the book
On the book jacket?
yeah. There's like but I read that and if it's not there, I read back of it. Or like what people say if there's like what people other people
Like book recommendations from other people?
no, like how people like people's thoughts. Like
The reviews of them?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Mine's the same as the internet.
It's the same.
I probably usually like first like look at the book's cover and then like usually I'll look inside and if it's like basically kind of like a magazine then I'll read it because I mostly like those. But like I'll first look at the cover and if it's like stuff I like then I'll click on it.
Okay.
I'll mainly try and read a book that would be in a series. And if I like it, I'll read the rest of the series. And then sometimes I won't, but I like history, so I'll look at certain topics that I really like for books that topic.
Okay.
How I pick a book is usually like just if I want to learn about something, or if I'm just like kind of bored and like I just want to find interesting new, or like a friend recommendation. Like if they say like, oh, this like Magic Treehouse book is good.
It's really good.
Yeah, then I would read it.
Do any of you pick like by author? Because I feel like a lot of times I find an author that I really like, and then I keep reading more books if I find an author. Is that another way that you guys do it? Sometimes.
If I see a book by Dave Kelsey,
Okay.
to see what it's about.
Okay. So we're going to wrap up this section and we'll be back in a little bit for our next section.
So I just want to highlight a couple really quick things. So really warmed my heart. It's been 4 or 5 years since I did my dissertation research, and to hear the kids shifting from talking about themselves as readers based on a reading level to talking about their reading habits and getting to know who they are as readers and where they get book recommendations from. Notice nobody said I pick a book that's just right for me because of my level. Those things to me were all just like huge shifts forward. And that's really important when we're trying to foster reading identity so that kids can become independent. So I also wanted to, share with you, let me go back. So for those of you who are looking for professional titles to help kind of move you along in this work of reader identity, Stephen Lane's Igniting a Passion for Reading has some awesome practical ideas. Phenomenal read. I know when I started my dissertation, Beyond Leveled Text really helped me sort of understand reading identity and what makes the text different, and being able to use that to help develop kids' identity and comprehension skills. Jennifer Saravallo's book came out right after I finished my dissertation, but it's also a phenomenal read. So then the next part we want to talk about is taking what we've learned about reading identity and how do we translate that into curating an inclusive collection. And I'm using the word inclusive very specifically. I saw a presenter, Chad Everett. He, I believe right now is an administrator and not in the classroom anymore, living down around Mississippi. I saw him at a conference, and one of the things that he said that really struck me was diverse from what? Like, we tend to say we're building diverse collections. And his point in making that comment was diverse from what? Diverse implies that there's one predominant race or culture, and that we're like looking at everybody else is different from that culture. And so he really advocated for the shifting to the word inclusive, which made total sense to me. Like, sometimes those small shifts in our language make a huge difference on the back end. So the depth and breadth of a classroom library is repeatedly mentioned by kids in my study. In the interviews that I had with them, classroom library had a huge impact on who they were as readers. Robust classrooms that are best able to put appropriate text in readers' hands include between 500 and 1,500 books. So it depends on what research study as to what number should be in a classroom library. And hopefully they're usually half informational and half literature. So let's talk a little bit about then, how do we curate a classroom library to really foster that identity and joy in reading? So here's sort of a life cycle of curating a classroom library. And I talk about collection. I'm going to talk about why I use that word in a little bit. For right now, when we're talking about the library, we're going to look specifically at print books. So another really quick story, when you're starting out, right, it seems like it makes sense to take everything you can get your hands on, right? You really want your library to look like it's something, like you've got something there. But I would argue sometimes that having more books isn't necessarily better. And I learned this lesson when I had a shift from one building to another 3 years ago, and then I got moved into 2 different classrooms. So I had to pack up my classroom library. I probably had over 30 books, and I weeded them out before I moved them back into the classroom. And I probably weeded out about 10 boxes of books, which was surprising even to me. And then I got shifted because they weren't sure what grade level I was going to teach, to a couple different classrooms who also looked like they had these robust libraries, right? There were tons of books there. Well, when I started sitting down and just like trying to quickly go through the books, what I realized was one of the libraries had this book, which was from the 1950s. I was like, holy cow, 1950s. Like, there were several books that were that old. There were also books that were high school canonical literature that I wouldn't have really put. I teach 5th grade, so I really wouldn't have put them in a 5th grade library. And I actually even found a couple adult romance novels, which definitely did not belong in a 5th grade library. So I would really advocate that more is not better. Like, yeah, it might look like there's a lot there, but our classroom library, our actions, which is translated into our collections, speak about our instructional beliefs. And those collections just did not represent things. I mean, this was not going to be engaging to kids. Some of the books were just flat out not appropriate. So be a little more selective when you're starting to acquire books. I would highly, highly recommend that. obviously I want to create a balanced, included library. And auditing a collection can really feel overwhelming. Like even the thought of it, just like, and then you just shut down and never get anywhere, right? But one of the things I learned was I can turn this into a project that we can do with the kids, and then it becomes a lesson, and a discussion, not even just a lesson, but it facilitated a great discussion with the kids in my classroom. So we did this two different ways. One way, we looked at the school library. I pulled the demographics right from the school report card. So it's public knowledge. The publishing information I took from this paper that's down here. University of Wisconsin conducts this study every year looking at the racial background of authors and of main characters in the books. And so I took that information directly from that study that is done every year. And then we just randomly pulled books out of the library, and the kids kind of flipped through and figured out like what race, what culture were the main characters from. I also do a daily read aloud every day, and we started tallying this information. This was like a great for me because I could just visually see when I'm leaning toward one direction or the other. And it just reminds me to make sure that I'm pulling books that allow every child in my classroom to feel seen and heard and valued. Processing and catalog is kind of a big deal. I encourage you to take the time to do this. Again, it takes a little bit of time. Your first inclination might be to just throw the books on the shelf. My first year, I lost a ton of books, and I had bought all those books. So I was not a happy camper when hundreds of dollars went out the door and I couldn't figure out what happened to them. Since then, I've developed this simple checkout system, and I'll show you how it works in a minute, but you notice the card pocket that's in the front of every book. I use Delicious Library because I can tag the books and put instructional notes, so it helps me find books quickly when I'm looking to teach specific things like alliteration or metaphors. Like I can tag those in books and find them quickly. The only thing I don't like about it is it's not web-based. So BookSource might be another idea that's web-based. I stamp all the books in my collection. And then typically I don't shelve the books right away. Typically that's a really good time to either use them in book displays, or it's a great opportunity for a book talk. A lot of times when I book talk brand new books, like they never make it to the shelves. Kids are fighting over who gets what. So it can generate a lot of interest, discussion, community. I also have class librarians who help me with these book displays, maintaining the book displays, coming up with new ideas. So the one is near our classroom library, which highlights different authors. One is a March Madness. That was a whole school one, but I've also done them in my classroom. It was totally fun. Got kids talking about books all over the school. I have my sizzling hot read. So one year I like literally brought in a little mini grill, and when I got new books, they got to the sizzling hot reads. They didn't last long. They sort of got pulled off really quickly. Another thing that I've done is a basket of book joy. I also have a classroom budget. So I have a box that's near that, but it's not pictured, where kids can put books that they want me to buy for the classroom library. And one of my librarian's jobs is to pull those like wish list books out, and they have a budget every month, and then they decide what gets bought, what doesn't get bought, and help like replenish and add more books. Basket of Book Joy I've used sort of has for celebration or rewards for various things. It just feels more genuine than like a pencil or something. I want kids reading books. And also we raffle books for different things, and I buy them for kids' birthdays. So I really invest a lot in bringing more books in, both independently and into my classroom library, which I know is not good that teachers have to do that. That's a whole nother conversation, but it's just something I really believe in. And the kids know that because I invest in it. We read classroom book a day, and this is the bulletin board outside my classroom that generates a lot of discussion with other classrooms, other kids on what we're reading. My checkout system I mentioned a minute ago, I have the pocket inside the book. So there's a simple pocket chart that's right next to the classroom library. Every one of those cards has a student's name on it. So when they check out a book, they take the card out, put it in the pocket behind their name. When they're done, they return it into a bin, after putting the card back in. Has part of that graffiti wall that's at the beginning of the year, but typically kids start adding to it, like just writing on the paper, or sometimes we use those book stamps, and they just write things that they like about a book or book recommendations. So it's right next to that checkout system. But I found that to be a really fast, easy way, and I lost way less books than I did the first year when I didn't have a good checkout system. Always be prepared to repair and maintain. So typically I keep that clear shelf paper. And I sat down with the librarian at my school and learned how they sort of wrap a book in that clear shelf paper to help protect it, particularly some of the paperback books. And they've also given me tips for repairing the bindings and some other things. So some of that work I do myself. Sometimes if I had a book that's really loved, i.e. damaged, the school librarians can help me with that. They've been really, really good about that. And then the dreaded weed and replace. So every year now I've made a commitment to myself after going through my classroom library and the other two libraries when I had to move rooms, that I just need to make this an annual practice, that I need to weed books out and replace them. Either could be the same book with a newer cover so that it's more engaging. It could be the information's outdated, whatever the reason. I try to make a commitment. And I just have said to myself, I'm going to pull 25 books when I close up the classroom or when I'm opening it. It's not a lot. It feels like a manageable number. It's not magical. And these are some of the criteria that I use. Do the books foster a love of reading? Are they reflective of our community? Are they equitable? Do they support the curricula? And are they high quality text? I'm also really lucky in the sense that I have a book recycling that's near my home. So a lot of times when I'm weeding books, I feel it kind of helps minimize my angst at taking books away, because I love books and it's hard to get rid of them, that I'm at least donating them someplace where they can still continue to be used. So, but weeding and replacing books is really an essential part of maintaining an inclusive classroom collection. And the other tricky part that many of you are probably asking, it was a question that I asked, how do I keep up with all of these new books, right? There's so much new, it becomes that becomes another overwhelming task. And so Donna Lynn Miller, when I was listening to her speak at a conference, gave a piece of advice that has been invaluable to me. She talked about curating a social media network of authors from various backgrounds and cultures, of different people who are really regularly reading books. And so that has been an invaluable tool for me, is sort of finding and cultivating a network that can really help me stay on top of what's new, what's important, what do I need to get in my classroom. I would highly recommend Colby Sharp is probably one of the best people that I follow in terms of just really helping me stay on top of new things that are out. You can sign up for his email and his tips about the library and his constant networking and talking about new books has just been invaluable. As a matter of fact, he and Donna Lynn Miller are coming out with a book, I think this summer or fall, specifically on curating classroom libraries. So highly, 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 I'm not even sure what it's called, but when it comes out, buy it. I recommend it. But I wanted to kind of come back to our kids, and we're going to hear just a little bit more from them about classroom libraries before we finish up today. Oops, sorry.
So give me a second to think about it and we'll start. Right. So welcome back to our second conversation. And today we're going to talk just a little bit more about classroom libraries. So you can kind of compare to a school library if you want, but I really kind of want to hone in on like the libraries in your classroom. So I guess my first question is, do you think like, does it feel really important to have access to books that are in your classroom? Or do you feel like you have enough if you have a good school library? Like, is the books in your classroom important to you?
For me, I sometimes pick books from my class library, but I usually don't even pick books from like I bought from like home or like just from the school library.
Okay.
I personally think that the classroom library is important and have like good books because I don't go to the school library every day. I don't really go to other libraries anymore too, so I think the school classroom library is good. I have no clue.
No clue? And you said you read a lot of ebooks, so you have access to those books in either place. So access to those ebooks is really important for you?
Some on Epic, like I mostly read Epic because I like that app a lot. And like some of them have the books from the classroom and I noticed that and I'm like, well, it's basically kind of like I'm going through the classroom books, so might as well click on it.
Okay. So your Epic library is important to you, having a choice there. Okay.
This library is important to me because it has good books that I like, and I like it because it's like has tons of books. Okay. I like the classroom library because it has variety, and like most of the books that I read are in there. The books in school library, I feel like I don't read as much because I've read most of them. I kind of agree with Leonia because the school has a lot of books that I like and read a lot. So yeah.
So we'll kind of do this one together. So if you're going to rate your current classroom library, so for Allie, go ahead and rate Epic, like your experience on Epic, 1 to 10. Like 1 is not very good. 10, really like my classroom library. And then how does that compare to ones that you've had in the past? Like, is this year, is that your best library? Why is it better than the others? Okay, so who wants to go first? Okay, go ahead, Dave. 1 to 10, how would you rate your classroom library?
My classroom library an 8 because I think it has a couple more genres or books in that genre than other libraries have experienced in other grade levels.
Okay. How would you rate your Epic library?
I would probably rate it 10 because I know in the past, like all the actual libraries, like the paper books, I know like it didn't really feel for me because like I would read it and I would think it's a whole different thing than the book is because I didn't understand it.
And you feel like you have a lot of choice in it.
Yeah. I would rate my mostly chapter and I like chapter.
So more comic, graphic novel type books would make it better. Okay.
I like graphic and
Okay, so more graphic novels in there. How about you?
I rate my classroom library because there's a lot of books to choose from, but there's not like many of the books that I'm interested in. There's like some scary books, but a lot of the kids like take it as well. And there's not many like fiction. Well, there's some fiction, but like it's not like fiction.
But you're feeling not as much choice.
Okay, so I'm going to pause it there. And I want to just briefly mention, because I think that this context is important to note. So Angie, who's feeling like there's not as much choice, is with a brand new classroom teacher who who doesn't have an extensive, robust library. Her library basically consists of the leveled bins that are clearly labeled. Gabe and Allie, who are sitting right there, are both in fourth grade as well, but they're with a classroom teacher who's been there much longer and does also have a robust classroom library, as well as the three other students who are in my classroom library. So I think you can hear that that classroom library is clearly an important consideration. And I'm going to stop it there just for time's sake. So again, some professional titles that might help you with this. Game Changer is by Donalyn Miller and Colby Sharp. It talks a little bit more extensively, not just about classroom libraries, but about really flooding kids with books, making sure that kids have access to books, classroom, school, outside of school. Trusting Readers is another excellent choice to help you learn about how to confer and get a better understanding of kids' identity, and then how to more actively involve kids in curating a classroom library, which is probably one of my biggest, like, they're my babies, my library books. So turning that control over to the kids is really important. I know it's something that I struggle with, but I know every year when I get a little bit better at it, it really does have a huge impact on kids. So again, we're trying to foster independent reading. I think when most of us think of reading as an independent act, but I would argue that our libraries, our classroom libraries, school libraries, they're social places where we really build literacy community that hopefully also includes read aloud. So with the last few minutes, the last component that I really want to touch base on is multimodal texts that build community. And this is where I'm going to start to say, like, referring to it as a collection and not just the print books. Okay. And this is how I think of it. In reality, when I look at the number of published books, most books are published still, like over 50%, by white authors with white main characters. Another huge chunk are like animal type books. And actually white are just that percentage of books that are published with main characters that are animals is bigger. That chunk is bigger than all the other books by all the other races. So by Black authors, Hispanic, Latinx authors, Indian, all those other types of authors combined are less than animal authors. So that's our reality. Like, how do you build an inclusive library when it's hard to find some of those books, right? Equality might be everybody getting a grade level book, right? Everybody reading at grade level. And obviously that's going to hurt some of our readers. They're going to feel not successful. Equity is when we start to like understand that we need to find that balance, which I'm going to come back to in just a minute. Like, not just grade level books, but just right text might mean a book at a lower level for a struggling reader, or a higher level for a more achieved reader, or a little bit higher level reader. That's equity. But when I think of liberation, like taking those walls away, I think about multimodal text. And what do I mean by that? I mean text that are books, that are articles, that are videos, that are infographics, that are pictures. So it's really expanding our idea and our definition of what a text is and what reading means, because everybody has access to a picture. They can read the picture, they can talk about the picture. It doesn't matter if they're a struggling reader or a high achieving reader. It really brings about equity, and more than just equity, liberation. Like, it opens everybody up to participate in discussion and be part of a community. I also use Padlet. So sometimes I curate that text collection. The previous one that I just showed you was when we were looking at the 20th anniversary of 9/11. That was curated by media type. We also do a westward expansion unit, which is curated by topic, and then all the media types are within those topics. And so that really, really just opens up a whole world for everybody and sort of evens out the playing field. So finding balance, really finding balance, balance literacy, right? Like that workshop style where we're reading aloud, we're interactive reading, they're independent reading, we're writing about our reading, balance text, like trying to get informational and literature from all different kinds of cultures, as many as we can find. Goldie Muhammad's work reminds me of the balance between identity and skills development, strategies, content, criticality, joy, reading joy. Oh my gosh, we need more reading joy. Reading should not feel like something we have to do for school, or we're not creating independent lifelong readers. So again, here's some professional titles. Goldie Muhammad's book has really touched me in such meaningful ways. Engaging Children has really helped me think through how my library and collection can foster that engagement, that intrinsic engagement. And then Read the World is by Kristen Zemke and Katie Maturis. They also wrote a book called Amplify. Tons and tons and tons of practical ideas to curate a multimodal collection. So again, I recognize that your time today was valuable. Thank you so much for spending it with me. I hope you found some useful ideas. I hope that it grounded you in some useful belief systems. If you have any questions, you want to give me feedback, communicate with me at all, my email, my Twitter, and my website. Thank you so much for joining me today.